My name is Stephen Erlanger. I'm the Chief Diplomatic Correspondent in Europe for the New York Times. And I have the great pleasure to participate again in this wonderful Athens Democracy Forum, which this year I think has a terrific lineup. And we're part virtual and part in person. And we have, for this discussion, I think, a big topic. It's called Shifting Sands, Geopolitics in Crisis Mode. And of course, that could be about almost anything. So we'll see where it takes us. We have actually 3 people on our panel. 2 of them are actually remote. I hope everything works well, but Ibijoke Faborode, who's co-founder and executive director of ElectHER. We have Professor Zhou, who is a China Forum expert and at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And with me, I have the honor to have the Vice President for Democracy and Demography of the European Commission, Dubravka, Šuica. So I have said to the panel we would try to do this in alphabetical order. So there are lots of questions that we can begin to think about. We think about the rise of authoritarianism, what happened in January 6th in the United States, the COVID crisis, the climate crisis. Is geopolitics in a crisis mode, or does everything just feel like a crisis because we're so tired of being battered and held at home by an invisible enemy called COVID-19? So lots to talk about. Competition between democracies and more guided authoritarian systems, the inevitable rise of Asia, the quieter rise of Africa, climate change, the push for equality, diversity, lots of things. So what I'm hoping is we have a connection to Ibijoke, who comes first. And Ibijoke, if you're there, the floor is yours. Okay, well, she's not ready yet, but I do wonder then, Dubravka, if I may, when you think about geopolitics, when you think about the worries of the future, does Brussels have an answer, or are you just riding on trying to keep the waves of change manageable?
Thank you for this question, but it's not easy to answer directly. So, well, I think we can all agree that there is no going back, and that is fine when we talk about democracy. We should never waste a crisis, but take seriously the lessons learned to evolve and move forward. This is how we look at this. In any crisis, there is a risk of turning inward and stopping to care, to worry about the outside world, which is not the case with the European Commission. So it was, and it remains, our key challenge for European Union foreign policy to avoid falling into this trap. So turning inward is not our direction. Clearly, the very global nature of the pandemic has made an isolationist stance futile. So with this in mind, our first priority at global stage is to speed up vaccination. Mm-hmm. Although you might find it at this moment not that interesting, but I think this is the most, the key priority of the whole world and also of European Commission. Some countries follow a logic of empires, arguing in terms of historical rights and zone of influence rather than adhering to greed, rule, and the world order. So we know that the world is becoming less free and democracy is under attack, both in established democracies, as you might have seen, and those in transition. And this is why we face at this moment, if I may say, battle of narratives. So we have, I think this is a position of European Union, European Commission, but all of us, we have to look and be ready to deal with the world as it is. So not as with the world as we would like it to be.
Wish it to be. No, precisely. Because to some degree it's a battle of narratives, but to some degree it's a battle of ideologies. So if I can just stop you there, and just for now, I think we have Professor Zhou connected to us. Professor Zhou, if you're there, you're in one of the great civilizations of the world, a rising China. For some reason, it makes everybody nervous. Why, do you think?
Well, thank you. I think the world is changing. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you all.
We're actually having trouble, Professor Zhou. You're sort of coming in and out.
Understand.
I'm sorry about that. Can you try again?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, better. Thank you.
Hello?
Yep.
I'll try. The point is that it's changing too fast for us to catch up with our understanding. It's still a pity if we grasp the opportunity and face the challenges, but there is a problem. It's called narratives. There was a tendency of cutting we from them according to ideology. My generation in China grew up with the ideal of building a more China with Mr. meaning democracy, and Mr. Tsai means science. And it has been put forward by the Communist Party's forefathers from the Western democratic actors. And oftentimes, there's some of the contingent people and the local society, and that we take as not useful.
Right. Thank you for that.
But we do actively learn from the West.
Yes, and we learned from you too, by the way. It's true. Do we have Ibijoke on the line by any chance? Has that worked? So Ibijoke, if you can hear me, I hope you've been able to follow some of this. How does it look for the shifting world we have in an Africa that is rising, that's getting better and better, where, you know, we often talk in the West about the problems, about famine and war and so on, but in fact, in general, I think one can say living standards are rising in Africa. Is Africa taking models from anyone else, do you think?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Can you hear me?
Yes, wonderfully, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I think different reasons first for so long, we have the stigma of the brain drain, where we have a lot of our educated and eyeing talents, you know, linked with more developed economy. But what we're then seeing is the diaspora market are beginning to reimagine how they are re-engaging Africa. And so people from different geographies are beginning to come back to the country, are beginning to share best practices, are beginning to invest there's more exposure as well. More African democracies are becoming resilient as well and pushing back the Western narrative of just aid funding and looking to investment as well. So I kind of feel like economic independence as well has played a huge difference in this. So when you look at the economy like Rwanda, so Rwanda had to make really strict economic policies. They had to improve on their gender equality. And for a part of the world where people think, Africa in this context, where people think that, where people only see the bad news, the famine, and all that. And you're seeing a country in Africa right now lead on gender equality across parliament in Africa. It really shows a whole lot. So I kind of feel like Africa is finding the way to engage with the rest of the world. And that's because of things like this, where you begin to see models in Africa. So many things have changed. I've actually faced this. If you look at Kenya as well, the fintech market, M-Pesa, how M-Pesa has revolutionized, the payment system and the financial market, how Western economies or more developed economies are coming to tap into the market to see how they can that to the financial or the fintech market as well. So while we still have a long way to go, yes, Africa is rising, but we have a marathon too. But in terms of Africa rising, the new normal, the new world order, Africa doesn't have the seat at the table as the preserve yet. But I think we're getting there. First of all, is the cheap with gas market. The citizens are getting much more interested and engaged in getting as well as speaking up. So, for example, Nigeria is more, so many things, more negative, positive, but it has to happen, right? So when you the African country, which was just a massive protest against policy that in terms of different issues, and how that in the global government as well.
Right.
That seems to help with how they engage in the country as well. But you're then seeing much more economically advanced success stories out of Africa. Before this, see the global media they focus on the issues of Africa, poverty, But now I kind of feel like success stories. People are treating what the marketplace in Africa looks like. People are treating what the new set of entrepreneurs look like. So there's just a whole lot of models, and you have a lot of people from diaspora. You have a lot of companies that come into settle.
Great.
You have much more ease of business and stuff of the economy. You're seeing an influx of AI into East Africa. So I think we need to see how Africa is rising and how the engage and respect.
No, that's a wonderful start. Thank you. I'm sorry for the awkwardness sometimes of the internet connections, but that's our life, right? So I wanted to come back to you, Commissioner, if I could. If there is, as the Biden administration keeps telling us, a new rivalry in the world between democracy and authoritarianism, between managed societies and our creative chaos, which is the nice way of putting it, perhaps. Does Europe feel trapped in this? I mean, people ask this question quite a lot, and everyone fumbles around, frankly. They say, well, we're not with the Chinese, but we don't want to be exactly with the Americans, and we don't want to be trapped in the middle, and we want to have trade, and we want to have cooperation with China, and we need them for climate change, but. It's a very swampy position. So how do you think of the dilemma for Europe in the face of these two potential rivals?
As you know, we are now talking about strategic autonomy. For us, it is one of the key goals to achieve strategic autonomy, whatever one can understand under this term. When you listen to my dear colleagues, when you listen what's going on in China, when you listen what's going on in Africa, when you see that Russia is a little bit aggressive, when you see that the United States are moving more inwards than outwards after Afghanistan, then we have to think about our position, and this is, we have to rethink our position. This is why we are now signing new partnership with NATO very soon. So we have to balance between defense and peace. We have to balance between military and diplomatic. This is what Europe is doing. When we talk about democracy, we said that, this morning, democracy is not static. It has to evolve. And it has been changing, and we have to change. We have been changing too, taking into account all these digitals, which we said this early afternoon. We have to harness digitals, but at the same time tame bad side of digitals. So this is with which we are all faced, and we have to reply to this. Our reply to this is cherishing democracy, using new innovative tools to cherish this democracy, and for us, citizens empowerment and citizens engagement is of utmost importance, because we cannot do anything alone. As I said, there is a gap between policymakers and citizens. We want voters in the end. So we want to make this gap narrow, and we want to listen from them. This is very courageous from European Union starting this conference on the future of Europe. This is very courageous move, because no democracy in the world has ever tried something similar. But we think by enhancing citizens' role and by integrating innovations into this process, we can do a lot. And this is how Europe sees ourselves as leaders, not only leaders in climate change, not only leaders in some economic issues, but also leaders in making our democracy fit for future. So sure. We say we have to make our democracy fit for future, which means that we have to engage also young generations in this process, which is for us of utmost important.
I mean, is there much of a fear that in the Asian century, Europe is not even less important, but not important?
We don't think so. We understand these trans-Pacific relations. We understand this, as you know, a few years ago, we were eager to start transatlantic TTIP, but we haven't managed. But our transatlantic relations remain forever, I think, because we are founded on similar or same values. So our values will stay forever. I'm talking about States, America, and Europe. Sure. But regarding Pacific, of course, they are emerging economies, and they are booming also in demographics. But at the same time, I think that our model, it's hard to say that is the best, but our model is a very good model, sure. And it's very transparent, I mean, very inclusive.
I mean, because one of the things that's happening too in climate change, and then I'm going to come back to Ms. Faborode on this, I mean, is, you know, more worries about migration coming from the south, not just from Afghanistan and so on. And so I wanted to ask you, Ibijoke, if I could, as you see this kind of budding new superpower rivalry, do you think, I mean, is Africa being pulled apart by it? I mean, do you think, I mean, Africa's a big term, I realize, and we shouldn't actually talk about Africa, but in general, are the nations of Africa feeling like they have to take sides, or do you think you can kind of manage between these rivalries and perhaps get the advantage of both. Now, we can see you, but we can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yep, now it's fine, thanks.
Okay, great, perfect. Yes, so the superpower rivalry has presented a unique opportunity for Africa, in the sense where Africa is beginning to look inwards, because obviously rivalry has a lot of countries are learning about how, well, selfish nations are. You understand, every nation is gender, and that was why, you know, Professor Zhou said, you know, economies are very unique. There's no right model or the right answer. I think for African countries, there's a lot of rethinking and reimagining how we engage with the international system, with countries, allies we're making. Like I said, African democracies are becoming more resilient, and this is due to a huge number of factors. So in a sense, I see it as an opportunity for Africa. I don't necessarily think Africa is taking sides. Unfortunately, most African countries are still very transactional, right? So the approach is, who do we get the most from? I don't really think it's more of taking sides. But for example, my country does a lot of business with China, right? Does business with European countries, does business with America. But I think the factor that really determines that is just international lending, rates to get, competitiveness, you know. And I think those are things that are pretty much shaping how Africa engages, just because of where we have the state of the nation as well. So Nigeria, for example, you know, Nigeria has the largest population in Africa. But also interestingly, so a lot of powers get more interested in Africa because of the human capital, because of the talent, because of the natural resources, because of more exposure, and also because of the huge rivalry between superpowers internationally now. So they need to then see where they need to get dominance and new power. You know, so I kind of feel like if Africa is really smart, it's a time for Africa to then say, look, we need to get to the negotiation table. We need to reimagine how you interact with us, how you do business with us, how you bring, you know, investments and aid. So I think Africa is just gradually shifting to that place where there's a subtle consciousness, and I think a lot of, because there's a shift in Africa when it comes to governance and democracy, and we're seeing, even though it's very, very little progress, you're seeing a lot of more technocrats, you're seeing a lot of more progressive-minded leaders come to power, as opposed to the very selfish leaders we had before who didn't care about the nation. And I think that is helping people reimagine how they then engage with international organizations, how they engage with the country to invest, how they negotiate local content as well. So I wouldn't really say Africa is picking sides. I think Africa is trying to leverage this rivalry between superpowers, just trying to understand the place in the international system, and trying to really see how they can navigate power as well. But they're then, you know, also looking inward as well, because the narrative that has, you know, been on for so long in Africa is African countries are not really inward or doing business or trade or interacting with themselves. They would rather do business with the rest of the world. But I think there's a shift now with Africa Free Trade you know, plan, and so that's helping Africa reach.
Great, thank you. No, that's a great help. I'd like to go back to Professor Zhou, if I can, and just ask. There you are. Hello, Professor Zhou.
Hello.
Hi. Can you talk a little? Just try to. I mean, what does China want out of Africa? Just for argument's sake, because we've been talking about Africa. Is it just minerals and business? Is it influence? Is it a place for Chinese workers to work? I mean, why is China so active in Africa? Or do you just think there's a vacuum there? And is it for China's interests, or is it altruism? What do you think?
It's a long story. I think China has a good relationship with Africa for decades. At the beginning, I remember very clearly, China took Africa as brothers in the same camp against colonialism.
Yes.
Because we had a similar history there. And then we have some principles of growing together, and that was beneficial. It was beneficial economically, and of course, politically, there are mutual support. As everybody knows that African countries were the main supporters for China to return to the UN. And later on, of course, the time is changing, the world is changing, and in order to develop faster, China and Africa need to work closer together. And then you see more and more cooperation in construction, in economic aid, and also that diversified kind of supports. Of course, we have also learned a great deal from Africa, or really active. They're positive thinking. So it was a mutual
yes.
sort of relations, positive relationship. And one thing we can hardly understand is that we believe that we're doing the good things in Africa. I've toured Africa
yes.
twice to find how the Chinese workers, how hard the Chinese workers work there, especially development aid workers, and also other people. But they were twisted. The pictures were misunderstood, especially in the Western world. And I don't know where those understandings come from. Many of those who have not gone to Africa, they have not viewed how Africans and Chinese work together. But there are some good publications. For example, there are American professor who put out a book called the Dragon's Gift.
Yes.
Talking about agricultural collaboration between China and Africa.
Yes. And
it was very honest stories
yes,
told.
yes. Well, also, I think China is also learning that some of its loan requirements are a little oppressive for some governments, and I think China's learning a bit about that lesson too. We have about 7 minutes, and I'm going to try to take some questions from the audience, if we can do that. So we do have a microphone. If someone would like to ask a question, that would be great, but if you could address it to a particular panelist, that would be wonderful. And so if I see a hand, fine. If not, we'll just keep going. So do I have a volunteer? Yes, I do have a volunteer. And if you could identify yourself and speak slowly because of the connection, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Alberto Alemanno. I'm a professor of European law in Paris, and I have a question for Commissioner Šuica. As you correctly pointed out, the Conference on the Future of Europe will be a major experiment in transnational democracy, entailing the participation of 800 citizens randomly selected, coming from all over the continent. What is the best possible thing that can happen out of this Conference on the Future of Europe, if you could choose?
Good question. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Alemanno. It's a very interesting question. As I said last time, we don't want to preempt any conclusions. We will see what will citizens deliberate in the end. But what I would like to pick up from the whole process of the conference is that I think the process should not stop next year in spring, although it will formally stop. but we have to continue similar conferences on local, regional, national level, all over Europe and in the world, if possible. Because, and especially when we talk about multilingual digital platform, I think that this can become a permanent tool, because this is a hub of the conference, this digital platform, and if we see that this is, until now we had first interim report, and this showed us that this is very interesting, what citizens are deliberating there. So we can keep this as a permanent tool, and listening, in order to listen to citizens all the time, because, as I said, this gap should be a little bit closer. So for me, active participation of citizens is the most important, and it is the future of European democracy. Because knowing that Europe is unique project of peace and security, but also of democracy, and this is what we have to cherish. As I said, it is not to be taken for granted, no more. Today, you cannot take these issues as business as usual. We have to work on it. And
that's true inside the European Union, too, in places like Hungary and Poland, I presume, right?
Of course. This is also
okay.
to be handled. And we have also tools to handle it.
Well, you're beginning to have some tools. You haven't had tools for 20 years, so let's see what happens.
Yes.
Are there any other questions from the audience? If not, I would like to ask Professor Zhou a question also. Do you believe, I mean, this is the Athens Democracy Forum. Do you think in the modern world, the world of internet and AI and everything, do you think democracy is in trouble, or is it enhanced by new kinds of technology?
Thank you for the question. It's a very good question. I think democracy evolves over history, and when the society changes, democracy changes. The new technology, obviously and definitely, is a good opportunity for the new type of democracy, because it facilitates connections. There are more voices will be heard, and the decision making has become flatter, less bureaucratic, less hierarchical. But as for what kind of processes, new processes, what kind of new institutions, and also what kind of mentality, we still have to see. I think it's pretty soon we're going to see a new kind of democracy.
Great, thank you.
And also,
yes,
there will be more similarities between democratic systems.
Good. So if I can ask Ibijoke if she's still with us, is Africa caught by this authoritarian temptation, or does it still think that democracy is the better way to proceed? And I'm not talking about the big man of Africa. I'm just talking about using new technologies. Is Africa tempted? I don't know if you're still there. That's the problem. Maybe not. Okay, so if you're not, thank you. Commissioner, if I could just ask you for a last word then. By nature, you have to be optimistic. You came from a Yugoslavia that broke apart in a very complicated, difficult way. It's still finding its way. Parts of it are more democratic than other parts. When you look, let's say, at the problem of, let's say, Bosnia, which Europe has invested so much in, and which the Croatian government is invested in, I mean, are you still optimistic that Bosnia as a democracy can work, or is it failing? And if it's failing, what needs to be done?
Thank you. First, let me clarify. My origin, I come from Croatia, and we joined in 2013, which is big advantage for us. You couldn't believe what is advantage to be member of European Union, and this is a pity that the other 6 Western Balkans countries are not following faster. Regarding Bosnia and Herzegovina, I am optimistic because I live now in Belgium, and I can compare these 2 countries. Belgium is a very decentralized country with the 3 or even 4 units. So why does Bosnia and Herzegovina can follow the same example? So, but of course they need help, they need assistance, but I'm sure that they will manage in the end, and I have positive thoughts that they will stay as one state.
Well, I hope you're right. It reminds me of an old Soviet parliamentarian that I knew very well. I'm not comparing you to him, but when I asked him about changes in the new Russia, and he said, you know, people talk about the Swedish model, and they talk about the European model. He said, our problem in Russia is we don't have enough Swedes. So
okay,
I thank all of our panelists, both here and outside, and if I would just love to give you all a short round of applause. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.